Hey, everybody, this is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series where I sit down and chat with other writers, sometimes with my dog right behind me, as was the case in this one. And I thought I could get away with it. And she made it. She was sleeping. She made it about 3/4 of the way through and then jumped off the chair and started jumping on me. So, lesson learned. Today on the show, I had Caroline Cleveland. So Caroline is a debut author, and her new book coming out in May of this year is When Cicadas Cry. So we had a fantastic conversation about a lot about how do you become a writer once you've so established yourself in a full-time job for decades. And in her case, Caroline became a lawyer and is still a practicing lawyer. And, at some point you get the bug to write, or maybe you've always had that urge to write. And then you try to figure out how to do it while having a full-time job, how to write an entire novel. And so that's always a challenge. And we delved a little bit into kind of that phase when you're a debut author and you're so excited to be there because it's such a hard industry and it's so next to impossible to even get an agent, much less a publisher. So when your debut novel comes out, it's usually been years in the making, and it's probably not the first thing that you've written. So there's a long road of rejection along the way. So then you're in this sweet spot of like, wow, my book is actually finally coming out. So we talked about just what surprised you during the debut launch process. And we spent a fair amount of time talking about PR teams, hiring your own PR team, and should you or shouldn't you? We're both proponents of it. But as we talked about in the episode, you just have to kind of let go a little bit because you cannot measure return on investment. You cannot say, this hiring this PR team sold me an extra 20,000 copies of my book. You just have to trust that all those things are in place to help you get more attention to you and your book than you would have received without it. And you have to make the determination, is it worth it, this cost that I'm paying? So we get into the kind of the nuts and bolts of that a little bit. And then I'll tell you, she did great with the story at the end. She had told me separately that, she didn't think she was going to be good, but she kind of ran with it. So, and I think it turned out great. I think you're going to like this one. This is my conversation with Caroline Cleveland.
Your dog is unconscious.
So this is, she was just out playing in the rain. We're about to get about a foot of snow. I'm in Colorado.
Oh, wow.
In the middle of the night tonight, we're going to get about a foot of snow, but it's raining now. So of course she had to go out and run around. So hopefully she's unconscious, like you said. Hopefully she's not going to turn, because she's still kind of a puppy. She might turn into a maniac and I might have to lock her out.
That's okay. So how are you?
I'm well. Nice to meet you. And congratulations on your upcoming debut. That's a singular time for an author.
It is. It's a strange and wondrous place I find myself in. I don't know any of the rules. I tend to be a walking faux pas because I'm not sure what to do.
Yeah, I still don't know any of the rules, but I will say that, it's always exciting when a book comes out, obviously. You never get used to it. But something about that debut is just like, it is just so like when you get your box of author copies and you open them up and you smell them. And it's just like, wow, it's pretty
It's
cool.
real.
So congratulations.
It's real. Thank you.
So you're in Charleston, right?
I am.
Beautiful, beautiful place.
It is. Would you please ask Condé Nast to stop telling people that? They just keep coming.
Yeah, I think the cat's been out of the bag for a few decades now about Charleston. Yeah, we went there it was probably 20 years ago, but when my daughter was real young, but we had a wonderful time. I imagine it's gotten pretty expensive to live there.
It has. If we hadn't bought our house almost 30 years ago, I don't know that we could afford to live the place we live. It's kind of crazy. They tell me that like 30 people a day come into this area to live.
Oh, wow.
That's and that's consistent, so it adds up. Yeah.
Right. Now, are you from South Carolina?
Never lived anywhere else.
Oh, wow.
I grew up in the Low Country in a really tiny place called Walterboro, South Carolina.
Mhm.
Unless you followed the Alex Murdaugh trial, you've probably never heard of Walterboro.
Well,
Um,
of course I followed that because how can you not follow that? But was that the actual same town?
That's the actual same town, the actual same courthouse that's in my story, but my story has nothing to do with Alex Murdaugh, I promise. And
But
Edisto Beach is where the wife's house, and that's the other setting in my story. So
oh,
it was
wow.
kind of funny. And none of that, his inglorious fall had not happened when I was writing this book. It was completing the manuscript that we just sort of got thrust into the nation's
Right,
crosshairs.
because when it happened very quickly. But the Murdaughs and have been, for lack of a better term, kind of an institution in that town for a long time. So even you growing up there, they had a
More so
footprint, I assume.
Yeah, more so in Hampton.
Okay,
The ones who were solicitors would have been in Walterboro, Colleton County as well. But Hampton is, if you can believe it, even smaller than Walterboro. So they were even
yeah.
bigger dogs there.
But that it's funny because that's the exact example of many, obviously, but a recent example of where a lot of authors have that desire to talk about, murder in a small town or evil in a small town, that kind of juxtaposition of this quaint, almost provincial town, and then what happens behind closed doors. I think that's an attraction to all thriller and mystery authors. I know I love it as well. Was that something that kind of, I mean, and then you kind of, grew up in that type of town or a
I
small town?
did. Yeah.
Um,
In fact, the interstate that goes by there now wasn't even there when we first moved there. So it really was a tiny, tiny town when I was growing up. Um,
and and I want to kind of walk through your journey a little bit, and then I want to come back to the inspiration specifically for your debut. But I know that your background and your existing work is within the legal system as a lawyer. Is that correct?
It is correct. I've been practicing for 32 years now. My practice is not in criminal law, it's in civil law, and it's
Mhm.
strictly employment law and only on the employment side and primarily public sector employers. So I work with a lot of law enforcement, fire departments, mayors, city councils. So I get to see a lot of back rooms and how things
Mhm.
happen. And I
Yeah.
don't think I could have written the way that I am trying to write now if I didn't have that layered experience of just how things really do happen, how deals are really made, and how quickly something can go a way you didn't think it would. It's always interesting to watch.
Yeah, I totally believe that. And I think that's something, I don't know if it's lost on readers, but something that isn't talked about a whole lot is, the reality of it is the preponderance, if not almost all authors have some other type of employment, have some other kind of income stream, because that is the brutal
The ones
nature
that
of the industry. I mean, we're talking,
the ones that eat do.
yeah, the 0.5% are full-time authors. And so it's a hard thing to do. And so people think, okay, you work, yeah, and then you figure out how to write otherwise, which is true. But a lot of people don't appreciate the fact that a lot of ideas come from the nature of what your job is. And some of the best crime writers are somehow connected to, if you want to call it, the crime industry one way or another. And some of the most fertile ground comes from full-time employment.
Oh, and I have most of my clients have been my clients for decades,
Hmm.
and there's one who's retired, but who I still go and meet with for every book I try to write because he sits down. Okay, this is the scene we're walking into. What would all my cops be doing? How many of them would be there? And he's so good on with that kind of stuff. I've been very lucky to have a lot of good friends who are they think this is fun to help me. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
been nice.
It is, because a lot of people are just, when they find out you're a writer, it's it's a weird thing for them because, what I found over time is like how many people then tell you like, I've always wanted to write. You realize, I mean, it's in a way, it's a little bit distressing because you talk to so many people with like maybe unrealized dreams. Um, and that you're an example of somebody who's doing it. And then you're like, yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's totally doable for anybody. You just have to commit to it. And that's a hurdle for a lot of people, I think.
Yes, it also speaks to me of a human desire to communicate. When I
Mhm.
realize how many people do write, even if they stick it back in a desk drawer, they have some basic need to communicate what they're thinking, what they're feeling. I think that's common. One of the things we have in common as humans.
Totally. And everybody has a story, whether it's just a fleeting thought that occurs to them after they watch a Netflix show or something they've been really thinking about for years. Unless you are completely devoid of creativity, which I can't think of anybody who's like that, everyone's got a little bit of story. But the idea of, well, how do I actually write it? And I get it, because when I think about musicians, for example, the idea of composing a musical piece is completely untouchable in my brain. I have no, it feels like magic to me. And I think some people feel like that about writers. But when you do it, it's like, okay, it's just a lot of failing, basically, and then you finally you finally figure it out. And I think that's true with anything.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
So when you were growing up in this tiny little town in South Carolina that didn't have an interstate, um, did you were you having thoughts about, at least postgraduate work where I'm like, were you always interested in being a lawyer, or was that creativity already kind of sparking in you?
Most of my life, there was no expectation that I would go to college.
Hmm.
I was not from that kind of family. We have modest
Hmm.
means. So, but I had a 12th grade English teacher who believed in me long before I made that step. So she sort of planted that seed.
It's so funny how there are all the people that I've talked to, that's a pretty common thread. There being one person, usually a teacher, usually in high school, who, had some kind of belief or some kind of, hey, you're really good at this. You should do this more, or you should take AP English, or you should do whatever. And, you always think about, like, were it not for that person, I wonder what would have happened. I still think you would have become a writer, it is nice to have that affirmation from somebody who kind of knows.
The first time she said it, I had a good friend who was wonderful with math, and I just stink at numbers. And unless it's money, I do okay with that. And she couldn't write a sentence to save her life, so she'd had an assignment with the same teacher to write. I can't remember, a poem or a short story, and I had to do some algebra. And I'm like, I will trade you. So she did my homework. I did her homework. I came out like smell like a rose because I got 100 on what the math she did. But the teacher gave her my little story back and said, "This is lovely. Please give it back to Caroline." I still
Wow.
have it.
That's hysterical. Your first work. But you did go to college, and then obviously you went to law school. So you were able to find those means, and I'm maybe through scholarships and student loans and all that fun stuff. Because I know my daughter's going to start applying to law school, so I know the costs and all
Highly
that.
recommend it. Highly
Oh,
recommend it. It's a wonderful life. I hear people all the time. In fact, I watched one of your interviews. I forgot. Might have been Robert Dugoni. It was someone who had started out in law and said they found it soul sucking. And I just thought, oh, how sad. They must have just had a horrible firm, because I just love it. I love that I'm in everybody's business, and they want me to be. I'm
yeah.
not being nosy. They're trying to help, and I'm learning about what they do. And I think it's a great way to make your
Well,
living.
I think it's like any other industry. Like, you still have to find that niche in the industry that appeals to you. Like, had you gone into, criminal law, you might not have had the passion or whatever. So it's about still finding that niche within there. And but my daughter, who actually helps edit these podcasts, so she'll be watching this whole thing as we talk about her right now. Um, she's taking criminal justice at Michigan State, and then she's interned with the Michigan State Police in their cold case unit, and has done all this really cool
Oh,
stuff.
wow.
So
Yeah.
she totally loves it. So she's like, I don't want to be a lawyer. I just want to be involved in that world. So to see people who are like consultants, or who assist the police, she loves all that kind of stuff.
It is interesting. I went to a writers police academy
Oh
and
yeah, I've heard of those.
did you go? It was so much fun. I mean, getting to touch and hold the things that I'd heard my clients talk about over the years. That was a lot of fun. It was very
Yeah,
helpful.
and yeah, totally. It's great for when you're writing. If you're writing a procedural, you need to know all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't write stuff like that. I write very personal stories where the person's not necessarily an expert, so they don't need to be researched a lot. But I'm guessing with your
Smart.
book, it's just more interesting to me. But I mean, I've always found that the people who do a lot of research, they just love research. They love it, love it, love it. And they might use 5% of everything that they've researched on something. And I'm not, to me, it feels like homework. So I eschew research when I can. But I assume, with your background and your book coming out, there's much you knew, but probably a lot like this Writers Police Academy that you really needed to dig into a little bit more.
Absolutely. I was lucky to have criminal law friends, but their civil procedure or their rules of procedure are so different than ours. In civil procedure, if you're suing me and we're on opposite sides, we have this elaborate discovery process. I can subpoena all these documents, your medical records, your marriage records. I can find out more about you than I would ever possibly want to know.
Hmm.
In criminal, this just stunned me. The guy's life, he could go to, he may have killed somebody. If he didn't, he may go to jail for something he didn't do, unless the defendant, the suspect, says, I want this discovery. Nobody gets anything other than what they can get from third parties, which is
Wow.
just, isn't that crazy?
It is crazy. It's kind of frightening, not for both from both sides of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it has to do with constitutional. They can't make you, you're right not to testify against
To,
yourself
to
or
self-incriminate. Yeah.
exactly. So it's rooted in law,
Interesting.
but it is strange.
So, you kind of broke out from your modest means and you became a lawyer, um, and you practiced law and you still practicing law for some time. Was there that bug that like I would really like to write, or what was the genesis of
Yes,
that?
yes, yes. That bug came early on. I can't remember when. I love to read, and I started probably with Grisham and Conley, and then the girls started to join the game. The Karen Slaughters, the Gillian
Mm,
Flynn's, the
mhm.
uh, Mary Kubicas that came and joined the game, and I started saying, "Gosh, I could do that too." Especially as I started working more with law enforcement. It just kind of dawned on me one day. I was talking with the friend who helps me on my books, and he said, let me tell you about this crazy case. And I'm listening to him thinking, I have stories to tell.
Yeah.
And so I started writing, I guess 2014 or 2012, somewhere around in there is when I wrote out the first, um, we won't call it a novel, we'll call it a learning experience.
Hmm, hmm.
It was
I
trash,
have
but
a few of those.
it was a fabulous way to learn the craft today because
Mhm.
as I started looking at it and saying, there's not something terribly wrong with my story, but there's something terribly wrong with what I've written. And it was just so much it was so much easier after that to go to conferences and listen to them tell me what to do because I could remember how I did it. You have to try something before you can understand what they're telling you to do, I
Yeah,
think.
100%. And I think you have the exact right attitude about it as you view it as a learning experience, as one, as a writer should view rejection. I mean, it can be frustrating, but it's just like, well, I mean, my own personal story, I started writing out of the blue, when I was 33 with zero background in it. And so I literally did like plop down in front of a computer. I'm like, how do I, and I always think it's like hand to hand combat writing those sentences because you're like, it takes so long and it's such a struggle and you don't know, even though you've been writing professionally, in a corporate job or in the legal system where you can be articulate and you can construct messages well, making it, you don't know about like, is this too much? Is this not enough? Do people care about this character? And the only thing that works is just doing it and failing, getting feedback, doing it again, repeat, repeat, repeat. And then you slowly start to get, I mean, I always say it was probably not until my third published novel, which would have been my sixth total novel where I feel like, oh, that's my voice. And it just takes a long time. What are how, when you started out, how did you find that experience?
For the first
Or
time I wrote it,
yeah, when you're 2012, when you're seeing now, like I have a story, here's a blank sheet
uh,
of paper. What do I do?
yeah, well, I knew where I wanted the story to start. I knew where I wanted the story to end, and I knew a few things they were going to come across along the way, but I didn't know, what characters they might meet on the trip. I didn't, it's kind of like plotting from, I'm going to go from Charleston, Atlanta, and I'm going to do the old fashioned thing and pull out this paper map. Here's Charleston, here's Atlanta. Do I want to go the interstates or do I want to go the back roads? Do I want to go in something that's open? Do I want to go in a car with a roof on it? That stuff I figure out as I'm going.
Yeah.
And sometimes my characters talk to me. I mean, or they surprise me. I'm saying I'll write a sentence and the other character will respond with something that actually works. I'm thinking, well, that wasn't what I thought would happen, but it's good.
Totally. Yeah. It's all your subconscious working because everything you've read is planted in there. And I think when people say the characters talk to me, I think what it is is your subconscious saying, I kind of remember this story that I read, and this character would have said something much more interesting, and it just comes out without conscious thought about it. And you just realize, like, oh, I've been learning this entire time. I just didn't realize it. But
Yeah,
even when you sit down for the first time, you're like, what, the idea of like, what point of view should I write in? What tense should I write in? I didn't understand any of that. So you just write third person past tense because that's feels like, well, a lot of what I had read. And
yeah,
then over time you realize, like, actually I'm much better at first
something
person
else.
present or whatever.
I tried writing something in first person, and it was good, but the really an exercise I did that showed me how much harder it was for me is I had a chapter I'd written in first person. I said, just for fun, I'm going to turn around and rewrite that chapter in third person. And when I
Mm,
rewrote it in third person, there was a bigger world around the
hmm.
person,
Hmm.
not just what they happened to see, but if a bird flew overhead that you didn't look up, the bird could still be there. So
Right.
it's totally different. It depends on what you want to show. If you're trying to hide something, you want to stay out of that person's head because the rule number one is you can't lie to the reader. So if
Yeah.
you let them in that head, you're going to know what the secret is. Then again, sometimes you can't. You need to be in their head to. So
Right.
it just
Or you can
depends.
have a very unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, and so what I found over time is that my strength is first person present tense. Like, so I usually just have one point of view and I'm just in this person's head for the entire book. But what I love is, they have to be truthful to themselves, but they might not have the best judgment. They might be slipping into insanity. You
Yeah.
don't know.
Right.
They might not be able to trust their own brain. And that's where I find it really fun because then you can really inject a lot of paranoia. But like you said, you miss out on this entire world happening around them, except for what their senses are telling them. And so you don't get a chance to really explore that very much. So it's definitely give and take. But it's also, I think, just what you find out over time what you naturally excel at. And for me, it happened to be that.
To me, it's more about what I'm trying to say or what I'm trying to hide. And then
Yeah.
it's a trick. It's kind of like the dual timelines. It's a trick to hide it's the same story, but it's a way to shuffle it to make it not make as much sense so that the reader has the fun of figuring it out.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Voice kind of does the same thing to
Yeah.
me.
Totally. So you started playing around with this manuscript 2012ish or so. Was that manuscript ultimately your debut, or that was just your practice novel?
Phew, that's like,
Yeah.
compost now.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah.
It really
But
was
did you get
awful.
to the stage of like actually like looking for agents with it or not even?
I did, and I actually got a couple of inquiries. I think my
Uh-huh.
premise was really good because if you
Yeah.
get inquiries, that means your premise is interesting to
Yeah.
those
The
people.
hook. Yeah.
But then when they got it, they're like, that's just a train wreck. Thank you.
Yeah.
Your project does not meet our current needs. Isn't that what they all
Right.
say? I
Right.
got a lot of
Right. Yeah.
that.
And so, but it's funny because a lot of people, when you talk about writing, a lot of people will say, like, how do you handle all that rejection? As if, if you had just gotten all those agent rejections, like, you're just going to quit, you know? And to me, I could never conceive of that idea of, like, why, I'll just keep trying because I enjoy this. But some people, I think it's so defeating. They spend so much time on a work and it goes nowhere, that they don't have it in them to write something else. But that apparently wasn't the case with you.
I think it has to do with my day job. I spend all day, every day at my day job, either with opposing counsel or some judge telling me I'm wrong, 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 and maybe
Mhm.
and possibly stupid. So it just
Wow.
you get used to it. That's part of the give and take. And after a while, I don't hear that, so it doesn't. I don't think it bothers me probably as much as it would bother the average person.
Yeah, it would bother me. uh, but so you just buckle down, like, all right, well, I'm going to write something new, rather than saying, I'm going to try to fix this
It
novel. I'm
wasn't.
going to write, and you get so sick of it after a while. You're like, I can't anymore. So you started something new. And what was that journey like?
That one was so different. I had a dream. This we have these big hurricanes down here. When they come, they
Mhm.
wipe out all the power, and it's sort of a time-honored tradition. You meet on all the front porches, and you drink and eat everything that's about to go rotten. Fortunately, now I have
Right.
a generator. I don't have to do that anymore. But on this particular occasion, I opened a bottle of champagne and perhaps had more than my share of it. And the next morning, I woke up, and as I woke up, I was having this really bizarre dream that I won't tell you because I'll give the story away. But um, I woke up and said, I want to write. And the end of the dream surprised me, which doesn't usually happen. I usually know I'm dreaming, but the end of the dream surprised me. And I woke up and said, I want to write something that surprises me at the end as much as that dream did. And so I said, well,
Huh.
how did I get there? And I wrote it backwards. I said, okay, that scene, where did that scene come from? Where did that scene? And I just kind of kept thinking backwards to what would have started all of this.
Wow.
A lot of time I was supposed to be doing other things. I spent thinking backwards, and it finally came out, and it got some interest. And I really thought that's the book we'd sold, because when my agent called me, she made a phone
So you
call and
got an
said,
agent with that book then?
yes, I got the agent with that book, and we submitted it, and she came back all surprised and excited. Marley Rusoff is her name, and she said, "I think we have the book sold." She said, "But they don't. They're worried about a first-time author with another job that you might be kind of one and done, and they don't want to spend their time investing in you if you're not going to be around." I said, "No, that makes perfect sense." She goes, "Do you
All
have
first
something?"
time authors have other jobs. Like,
Well, they want to make sure you're going to come back with something else
yeah.
before they spend any time. I said, sure. She goes, do you have something you're working on? I said, sure. I got about 40 pages of something. It's still pretty rough. I don't know how it ends, but here, take it and look at it. It's the Cicada book. And I gave it to her, and she called it, we sold the book. We sold the book. I said, oh, great. And she says, well, when can you have it ready? I said, it's ready now. She goes, no, 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 they want the other book. I said, no, 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 you can't do this to me. This was late August. She said, oh, it's okay. You have until January. I'm like, oh. So
Late
other than
August of last year?
of 22,
'22.
I had until January 23 to finish it. So I wrote that whole book other than the first 40 pages in 4 months. So it was with Christmas, and it was crazy. But then after that, obviously we made some developmental edits, and then obviously went through copy edits and all those stuff. And we got moved back a couple of months for pub dates, a time or two. So, but we're
Yeah.
finally there. But it's been a wild
Wow. That,
ride.
yeah, that is crazy. So then you basically, all your focus becomes on that book. And I guess your agent can still shop the other one, but
Well,
it's,
actually, they have an option, so we can't. We're kind of sitting and
yeah,
waiting. They wanted an option on the second book, so
yeah,
we have it.
yeah. Wait, which is pretty common anyway.
Yeah,
Um, to have that
not
option,
like
but
anybody's
that's,
banging the door down.
but that's, but that's a wild story because I mean, that's a really tight deadline, knowing you have this full-time job. um because you want, and I'm not bashing your publisher at all, I just find it fascinating because you definitely want it to be a good story. You don't want it to feel like it was like rushed to get there. So that's interesting, but and then I guess you're going through this whirlwind of emotions where you're stressed, but you're also excited because you sold the book.
Well,
And
they asked me to do a synopsis of it so that they knew where it was going. So I figured out my synopsis helped me figure out a lot of where I expected it would go, and it was pretty close to that. So
yeah.
it wasn't quite as bad as all that, but they kind of knew what they were getting. And the editor, um, she had edited the first book, the one that was finished, while she was freelancing. When she went from publisher to publisher,
Oh, okay.
so she already knew the book and loved it. But then she saw this, and she's like, "Ooh, this is better. I want this."
Wow.
So I
Wow.
know her name is Claire Wachtel.
And that makes sense too, because publishers, I don't know that it's much of a secret, but a lot of aspiring authors don't know this, but a publisher doesn't just want to know about your book. They want to know about what else do you have, not because they're more interested in that what else necessarily, but that they're investing in you as an author, not as you as a book.
Right,
Um,
right.
and and because it takes a long time to start earning money for most people, to earn out your advances and stuff like that. So they want to build you as a brand and know that you are going to continue to produce. And that's very intimidating to a lot of people. Just like they'll go and they'll want to see what kind of web presence you have. What are your social media accounts like? All that stuff is important, and I think that's lost on a lot of writers.
Oh yeah, the writing's the easy part. That's the fun part. The other part is a little bit kind of grabs you up in like a whirlwind, and you're just kind of hanging on to the tiger's tail.
Yeah, like how many times am I supposed to post on Instagram a day? And
Oh
and
yeah, mine's sad.
yeah, mine's not great either, but I get audits from my PR team once a year that says like you should be doing more of this or less of this but my big takeaway, and I've said this before, from them is always like, hey, you don't have to do everything. Find what you can do, find what you like to do, maybe what you're good at, and focus on that. So for me, that's my newsletter because I can own those names. So I really dedicate my time and very consistent with that. Social media, I'm okay. I'm not great. But it all depends. But you have to have something because the publisher wants to know that you're representing yourself out there and that you're helping sell books and it's not all up to them.
Yeah.
So what has surprised you the most through this journey, especially post sale and leading up to the launch?
I guess maybe the logistics of how books get to stores and how stores decide what books they want.
Mhm.
My publisher's been, I think, very supportive of me. They took me to Winter Institute and with the ABA booksellers, and so I got to get their perspective. I got this little bitty store. I have finite shelf space. There are all these books to choose from. Why do I want yours? And it's a valid question. So trying to think about, why is my book competitive? Why will my book be competitive in the marketplace? What do I have to offer to put on your shelves? It was a different perspective. I don't think that I'd really thought about it that way. I think perhaps it helps that I founded the law firm I'm in, and I run it as a business. So I kind of understood that the numbers have to work at the end of the day. Right now, my writing ledger is a glorious shade of red.
Totally. I mean, that's what it'll be like for years probably. But I
Yeah.
mean, and it's easy to bitch about the publishing industry, and God knows I do a fair amount of that. But you're absolutely right. And I come from a business background, and it's just it's not the publisher's fault that people are reading less these days. It's not the publisher's fault that Barnes and Noble is ordering fewer and fewer copies unless you're a huge name. That's just the nature of the capitalist angle of it all. I'm going to shut my door before my dog drives me nuts. She finally woke up and started a
Sure.
little testing.
At least she hadn't
Um,
started howling yet.
and then you, I'm guessing on your own decided, which is what I've done with every book of mine, is seek out your own PR team that can
Megan.
augment your in-house marketing and PR team. So you went with Megan Beatty. What was kind of what was your thinking around that as a debut author, not even knowing, probably what a PR team really even does. I still don't
Well,
quite
right. I
know.
couldn't, I had a hard time understanding the difference between public relations and the PR and marketing.
Right.
Whole different thing. And a gentleman named John Pitts, who actually used to do marketing for John Grisham, I was asking him, my agent, bless her heart, she knows everybody. But I was talking with him and he said, PR is when you're telling people about the book and you're telling them for free. He said, when you spend a lot of money to tell people about the book, that's marketing. I
That's
said,
funny.
oh, I get it. Okay, now I get it.
Yeah.
But I had a good mentor in Marley. She pushed me toward Megan. She said that she had used her, or Megan had worked with some of her other clients, and she was very impressed with the contacts that Megan had and the effort that Megan put out. And Megan's energy and positive reinforcement is just priceless for somebody going through this on their own.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know it's expensive and it's easy to say you should do this. And I know there's financial considerations that are very real and valid. But if you have the wherewithal, I, I've hired my own team for all 9 or 10 of my books so far. And I've gone through a
Same
few
team.
different ones. No, I've gone through a few. Just because I'm very analytical and I always like to think like, well, what happens if we did this? What if we try this? So, but I've been with the same team, K Publicity, for I think the last five, 5 or 6 books.
Right.
So they're great. But what's so frustrating and authors need to understand is you cannot really measure an ROI on hiring a PR team. You're not going to say, except for some rare things that they might do, you're not going to say this maneuver sold, 1,000
Textbooks.
extra. Yeah. You're just kind of saying, hey, I'm doing everything I can within my means and within reason to give this book the most fighting of a chance to survive, to get, to have some kind of attention. And you just kind of have to let the rest of it go. And just, but what I've seen over time is that my readership has grown over time, organically, and I think, or not so organically, also because of the PR and marketing efforts. I don't know if that would have happened had I not hired my own team. I have no idea, but I like to think that it was all money well spent.
There are so many people that she's pitched that then responded to us. So I know that I've gotten, whether that attention actually translate to book sales, who knows that, like you said, but I know that I've gotten the attention of people that I wouldn't have thought to go get bang on their door but for her. So in that way, it has been a big help. And to me, the whole point of book one is to be invited to write book number two.
Right. And so what is that process for you? You obviously have this other book that's written, and then your publisher is optioned for book number two. And is book number two something already that's underway and is related to book number one, or what's the
I'm working
status?
on a couple of things.
Of course you are. You're
Of
juggling.
course I am. I just, yeah, it just, I, a book comes to a point, the early part of it, I don't seem to know. I know what I want it to do, but I don't know if it will really work. There just comes a point somewhere near the end of Act One in a 3-act book where I said, oh, yeah, these people gel. This works. There's somebody to like here. There's a bunch of people to hate here. There's something to be scared of. This is working. And
Yeah.
the two I'm working on haven't gotten right. Either one quite to the point where I know which one will get that little spark to make it right.
Yeah. And it's like everything else with writing, it's a mix of, kind of waiting for that inspiration, but then also not depending on the muse to come and pluck your heart and tell you it's time to write the book. It's because it is a business, and like you have to write every day. And sometimes people just like wait till they're in the mood, and that never really
Yeah.
works.
And you know, a lot of it has to do with what the publisher wants. You know,
Mhm.
if they decide they really want a sequel to the first book, then that will be what I do, because it does me no good to get a book I love that nobody will ever read but me. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah. Yeah, and it is tough because it's so incredibly difficult not only to get an agent, but then to actually get published, that you do feel like as an author that you're kind of, you're serving at the pleasure of their what they want. And I've learned over time, sometimes to my benefit, sometimes to my detriment, that if I just write what interests me, um, that gets me to finish the book. Um, so I don't think my publisher would ever ask me to write something that didn't interest me, but some people are just like, I'll just keep doing the same formula, and you start to lose your joy a little bit if that's not
oh
what your
yeah,
job is. So,
yeah,
and it's so hard to write that it just makes it harder if you're doing something that you don't want to do. Um, but
it
it's also really
shows.
hard to say no. It does show. I think you're right.
It shows if you don't like. But if I've taken on two projects, both of which I thought had potential, that they like one better than the other
Right. Totally.
doesn't really ruin it for me either. Yeah.
No, no, of course. And it gives them options, which makes it more saleable. So which is always the point. But Caroline, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to come to the part of the show that
The
you
scary
expressed
part.
keen interest on, the making it up part of the show, where we're going to do something a little bit different. Actually, I'm going to have you pick a color, and then I'm going to choose a book with that color as the book that we'll kind of launch from. So what color is speaking to you?
Red.
Everyone chooses red. That's so funny. All right, let me find something. Um, all right. Speaking of the South, I have Stephen Hunter's Hot Springs,
Okay.
Arkansas. Um, this is an older book. What year was this? Oh, 2000, not that old. So
Thank you.
it's
We
very
all
yellowed
talking about
pages, so I thought it was really old. So give me a page between 1 and 500.
182.
Okay. So I'm going to pick a sentence, and then I'm going to read that sentence, and that'll be the first sentence in a quick back and forth short story. And we will see how it goes. Um, okay, I'm just going to read this, and then you give me whatever you got for a sentence or two, and then I'll do a couple, and we'll see where it goes. It's simply, what the hell is this about?
What the hell is this about? She asked her friend at the bar. You know what it's about, he said, or you wouldn't be, there's no need for you to be asking. The bartender just smiled. This couple comes in every week and they have the same argument every week. The dumbass never realizes he's never going to win the argument. Usually, Joe found this amusing, but tonight the bartender was distracted. Tonight, his attention was at the other end of the bar on a petite redhead who was nursing a glass of bourbon and pretending to watch sports on the screen over the bar. But he knew she wasn't really watching the screen. She was looking at the mirror, the big one, the one that gave her the perfect view of the door behind her. What was she waiting for? He wanted to find out. He started making his way toward that end of the bar.
He asked her what she wanted to drink, and she said Cosmo, which disappointed him. When he considered her, she realized she wasn't nearly as confident as she was trying to portray. In fact, he thought she was downright nervous. He did what he always did. He played the story out in his head because he always wanted to be a writer. He pictured this as a first date, but in his mind, first dates always go terribly wrong. And at that moment, the door opened.
Her look wasn't what he expected, and it looked like maybe the person walking in wasn't what she expected either. A man came across the room and sat down beside her. he asks, "Are you surprised to see me?" She said, "Why would I be here if I didn't know you would be here?" He said, "Well, do you have what I asked you to bring?" She said, "No, I don't." "And why not?" "Because I'm not going to give it to you. You can't blackmail me anymore. You've been sending me text all week, and I'm just tired of it. I'm not paying. I'm not doing it. You want to go tell my husband everything I did. You go right ahead. But you need to understand this." "What is that?" he said. And she held up her phone and she showed him a photograph.
Oh, I think we call it there. That was great.
Like, well, good. That was fun.
Yeah. I was kind of thinking like that the bartender almost recognized him from a police sketch and that
Oh, that would have been a good way to go.
well, what a, whenever you have a bar setting, it's kind of like an
Yeah,
airplane.
anything can happen. Yeah.
Anything can happen. These people can be from all different walks of life. Well, Caroline, what a pleasure to meet you, and congratulations on your debut. It's such an exciting time. I know it's going to do well, and I'm very excited for you. And I hope we get to meet up at a conference or something someday.
I hope we do. I've enjoyed this too. It's very nice of you to take me on, and I enjoyed meeting your dog and you. All
Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your week, Caroline.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye. So that is it. That is my interview with Caroline Cleveland. I love talking to her. She was fantastic, and I'm so excited for her new book coming out May of 2024, When Cicadas Cry. It looks fantastic, and I know it's gotten some amazing blurbs on it, and I think it's going to really take off. So best of luck to her. If you want to find out more about Caroline, and I ask that you do, go ahead and read all about her at her website, which is carolineclevelandauthor.com. And go ahead and pop on over to my website as well, carterwilson.com. You can buy my books, read, see what events I'm going to be at, read my blog, sign up for my newsletter, all sorts of good stuff. And there's a little link on my website that says For Writers, and that will take you to information about my company, Unbound Writer, which offers writing retreats, one-on-one writing coaching, and soon we'll be offering online classes as well. That's it for now, folks. Thanks so much for watching and or listening to this episode of Making It Up. Another episode will be out just next week. In the meantime, take care.